So we've previously taken a look at how religion eventually motivated Western Europeans to cross the Atlantic and colonize different areas of North America. The idea of the Reformation and predestination of John Calvin influencing the Puritans, Henry VIII forming the Anglican Church, and the friction that that caused. What we're going to do here today is continue with this theme of religion because it is critical in understanding colonial America, but we're looking at how religion directly influenced the setup of different colonies. So we start with Plymouth. Plymouth, the place where you might think of it as, hey, pilgrims, Thanksgiving, all belt buckle hats, things of that nature. Well, understanding Plymouth, yes, does begin with Puritans, but the core settlers of this colony are fleeing the Anglican Church. Remember, that's that Church of England that Henry VIII first formed back in the 1500s. They believe that the Anglican Church is too corrupt to be reformed. It's too corrupt to be changed. So what they end up doing is fleeing to Holland. Holland, which is where the Dutch lived, was seen as much more tolerant. And these individuals actually become known as separatists because they fled England instead of staying to work within the system. Now, Holland is tolerant, which means that lots of people wanted to go there. And we've already seen what happens when you have more people competing for the same number of jobs. Doesn't go very well. So these separatists strike a deal with the Virginia Company to settle in Virginia. Now remember, we have the London Company and then the Plymouth Company. Enter the Plymouth Company. So these individuals, and we can see here, 35 of them were these separatists, the pilgrims, people making a religious journey. 35 were pilgrims, 65 others who didn't have an affiliation with them get on the Mayflower. Now the ship was blown off course. That's one version of the tale, that they were meant to go to Virginia, but they were blown way off course and ended up north of where they were supposed to be. If they had gone ashore in a place where they were not supposed to be, that could have been viewed as treason and defiance to the king. So every adult male on board the Mayflower signed what became known as the Mayflower Compact. Compact as in agreement. Really, the Mayflower Compact isn't very long. I mean, in size 11 font, the whole thing is less than half a page, single spaced. But it did have three main principles. First, these individuals were saying, hey, we're still loyal to the king. We may be in the wrong place, but we are loyal. Please don't execute us. The second thing they pledged to do was to just build a colony within the framework of being loyal to the king and to England. They didn't want to form a new nation. And finally, they pledged that they would maintain order and establish a working government. So that's sometimes why the Mayflower Compact is seen as another kind of big moment in colonial democracy, because all these adult men willingly came together and signed this covenant. Now, interestingly enough, they settled in an area where the land had already been cleared. It had already been worked over, but the original inhabitants had all died due to a previous disease epidemic. Now, there were about 1,500 people in the colony 10 years after it was first set up, but land was communal. That's what no private prop means, no private property. To stagnate means there is no growth, doesn't get any bigger. There's not much incentive for people to go if they can't have their own land. So it kind of somewhat struggles to survive. So Plymouth is the first place. The second place we look at is the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This man, Governor John Winthrop, received a charter from the king for this colony. Now, he gave his famous City Upon a Hill speech before everyone departed the ship for the colony. They set sail, he gives a City Upon a Hill speech, they leave. But in this speech, he claimed that their colony, this Massachusetts Bay Colony, could be a shining beacon of light for the rest of the world to follow. It can be a new example of what society could be. They want it to be a model for everyone else to follow. And this sets off what was called the Great Migration of Puritans to the New World. About 45,000 Puritans in total will make their way to the Western Hemisphere. 20,000 of them are going to go to New England. Now, as far as Puritan society is concerned, Massachusetts and other, Puritan colonies that came later, those Puritans preferred to settle in towns, kind of together, because it would provide more safety from Native American attacks. And if everyone was together, it would be easier to support schools and the churches that were so important to their society. There were others that spread out in search of more farmland. And that's where a lot of these new settlements will come from. Now, the Puritans believed that their way of life was the best. And if you disagreed, they'd get rid of you. Plain and simple, anyone who vocally disagrees with Puritan beliefs, they'll banish you. And those who disagreed with established religious practices are known as heretics, or people who are heretical. Now, the banishment and sometimes voluntary expulsion, or people deciding to leave, this is also going to lead to more settlements in New England. So you have people fanning out in search of more farmland. You have people who disagree with the Puritan faith saying, I'm going to take my chances elsewhere. Regardless, Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay Colony both have their roots in the Puritan faith. Now, the last religious colony we look at is religious in a little bit different way, a place called Rhode Island. Now, this man, Roger Williams, he's a very interesting individual for the early 1600s. He was a minister in Salem. Yes, that Salem, home of the famous witch trials. He was supposed to be arrested and sent back to England for condemning the king. He condemned the king for giving away Native American land, which for Roger Williams, to recognize that Native Americans originally inhabited the land, thus owned it, and should be paid for it, that was seen as unique and different for the time frame. He also condemned the Puritan faith for remaining within the Anglican Church, and he felt they were corrupt. Now, he didn't want to go back to England, so what he did was fled south. He went south of Salem with some of his followers, and he founded the city of Providence, where different religious ideas would be tolerated instead of being pushed out. Now, he insisted that all faiths would be accepted in his settlement. And this lays the groundwork for the idea you see here, the separation of church and state. See, throughout most of human history, church and state have been one and the same. Most governments were led by one person, like a king, and often that king was seen as like a god on earth. So church and state were one and the same. Now, in this case, Roger Williams wants a completely new and different idea, an idea that is still with us today. Now, the other person that's fundamental in the founding of Rhode Island is Anne Hutchinson. She caused a stir because she led religious meetings from her home, which was a no-no. And she openly questioned the authority of the ministers. She tried to explain that those who would achieve salvation, those who were to be saved, should only follow moral laws like the Ten Commandments, not necessarily church laws, which were written and interpreted by men. She publicly went against Governor John Winthrop. She rebuked the governor himself. She was banished as a heretic and took refuge in the new town of Portsmouth. Now, in 1644, Portsmouth and Providence fused with two other towns that were also founded by banished Puritans, and they received a royal charter as Rhode Island. Now, unfortunately for Anne Hutchinson, she and her family were killed about 1 year before Rhode Island received its charter. So she didn't get to see it happen, but she definitely laid the groundwork for what it became. Now, interestingly, Rhode Island and the people who lived there were despised by the residents of Massachusetts and Connecticut. However, it was an outlet for the rest of New England. Those who wanted to flee the strict faiths of Massachusetts and Connecticut had a place to go in Rhode Island. So, as much as they didn't like it, they needed Rhode Island because all the people who disagreed would go to Rhode Island, which left the true believers, so to speak, in Massachusetts and Connecticut. So we have Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Rhode Island serving as our three primary examples of colonies where religion played a huge role in the founding.